You're listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, the voice, Jeff Tucker.
Not in the car. In the house. It's too hot in the car. Last time I did one in the car, my phone overheated. Again. Did you know phones can overheat? But they can if they're left in the sun operating. And the phone tells you, like, look, dude, I'm dying. You have to get me out of the sun. So I figured out how to do this indoors. How did I do that? Everybody's at work. So I have like this much time alone in the house to record. Hey, don't listen to this horrible show I'm about to do. Instead, go to the Civil Gore podcast. Civil Gore, like Civil War, but Civil Gore. It is a horror podcast, horror movies, horror television, hosted by Tim and Brian. Good times over there at the Civil Gore podcast. I just did an episode with them where we talked about all kinds of 80s nonsense. Then we talked a little bit about The Frighteners. That was the main reason I was going to be on the show. Talk about The Frighteners. So I talked about The Frighteners because at least that's a horror movie with a Michael J. Fox hook. But check that out. And then Tim's brother, Kevin, is on the show as well. So we're all sort of intermixed there talking about 80s and what it was like growing up in the 80s. Isn't it funny, like how we used to laugh at old people who would sit and talk about, well, you know, when I was a young guy, when I was a young man in the 50s, and we'd imagine like the guy telling us in black and white, strolling down the street like in a black and white silent movie while an organ plays, and like the way things are so different now. When I talk about the 80s, the first thing everybody thinks about is like Dayglow colors and, oh my God, Michael Jackson and Madonna. And you're like, yeah, that's not what the 80s was. The 80s aesthetic that people subscribe to nowadays was made by a company. So a bunch of people got together and decided this is what the 80s is going to look like. Pink, gray. Now, we did have some of that, but you'd have to like seek that out. You'd have to go to the mall, go to a store like Doodah to see that kind of aesthetic, or watch Facts of Life. The last season of Facts of Life, remember they turned the store into a novelty shop called Over Our Heads, and they had that aesthetic. Or like the house in Beetlejuice. Like, those are anomalies. Most of us lived in drab, brown furniture houses full of horrible, like we had this couch that was mostly cloth but wooden armrest, like really, really ugly. We had a giant brown fake wood console television, and when it died, my mother put a smaller TV on top of it, and so now the console TV with a tablecloth became a TV stand. So then we had that TV there, and eventually that TV crapped out too. And what did she do? She put a smaller TV on top of that one. It looked like Tetris televisions in my living room. And each time the cat, which sat on the TV, like, again, with today's flat screen TVs like this one, you don't really understand that unless you were there. TVs used to get really hot. Like, they would get so hot, you could touch them and go, oh, like, there's an old saying, is the TV warming up? Yes, it's warmed up. Turn it on, go make a Pop-Tart, come back, and the screen might be fully engulfing the screen. But, the cat would lay on the TV to get warm. So when the next TV went up, the cat laid on that TV and then finally on the smaller TV until the TV was so small at the top, if the cat slept for too long, it would just fall off. But that's a more realistic version of somebody's going to make that movie. Maybe it's me. I've actually met with a movie producer once who wanted to turn all of my Berg and drunk stories into a movie, and it'd have to be an 80s period piece, and you'd have to really like embrace that horrible 80s aesthetic of the realistic one, not the Dayglow one. Like, the difference, I mean, it's a world difference between, like, look at Marty's living room in Back to the Future before it changes, the one at the beginning. That's the typical 80s living room of brown and the big brass ship on the wall and, like, really just oppressive, boring, drab. You'd have to embrace that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be realistic. It would look like Earth Girls Are Easy, which came out in 888, late 88 or early 89, and sort of didn't create, but help propel that what you're thinking of, the 80s aesthetic. That was from Earth Girls Are Easy, I think, was the first big movie to do that. The Cafe 80s in Back to the Future 2 would not show up until November of 89. So you're at the tail end of the decade, and you're able to look back across the whole decade and just pick and choose the things that you wanted to put in your movie, and not, just turning the camera on suburbia and what it actually looked like back then. So it's interesting to have conversations about the 1980s and find out what people, what their perceptions are versus reality, if that makes sense. So check out the Civil Gore podcast. I had a great time talking with those guys. I'd go back anytime. It was really fun to just sit, talk for, an hour and a half. And what's interesting about that, and I've talked about it on this show, is for the most part, this show's just me. Like, it's just me talking to nobody. I'm talking to you. But in the physical room, there's nobody here. It's just me talking to you, telepathically. I'm envisioning you listening. So when I take a break, like, I either have to cut the break out or let it sit. Sometimes I let the break sit because I think it's okay to let things sit for a few minutes. Seconds, not minutes, right? If I was silent for a few minutes, you'd think something had gone wrong. You'd tap the screen to make sure I'm still on. But it's great doing a show like that because I can take a break. They can talk. I can interject. I can add. Blah 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 blah. And I know that's the most successful podcasting platform program rundown, is to have multiple people talking so that you can take a break and not have to do an edit to give yourself a break. The edits I make on this show are usually I'm either coughing or taking a drink of water. And it's funny, too. You should see me editing these shows. I will sit and you'll be going along really well, not have to edit anything out. And then suddenly there I am taking a big drink of water, and it sounds disgusting and it's horrible. And I have to wait and figure out, like, where does the drink start and where does the drink end, and snip that part out and then fuse them together. And sometimes I'll talk to myself and go, I hate you. Why are you taking so many drinks? Can't you just talk? Why do you have to do that? Or coughing, like, oh, that's disgusting, man. I'm talking to myself. I'm angry at myself. So I'm saying it now, like, future me who's editing this episode, I apologize. I'm going to take a drink now.
A few moments later.
I thought I'd come on today and we'll talk a little bit about some of those little stories that got lost along the way. I've talked about my mother meeting Berg in late 84, I think, is when they started dating. And then he was living in our house for most of 85 onward. But he was trying to hide some of his more eccentrically frugal ways. Is that a good way of saying it? Eccentrically frugal, like cheap skate ways. I've talked about how he was the cheapest man I'd ever known. 6 squares of toilet paper? 6 squares, Jeffrey. I know, Berg. I know. 6 squares of toilet paper. You only get 6. What if you fold it over? You fold it over if you need more. What if I need more than that? Then you have to get in the shower. So now we've turned going to the restroom into an entire 20 minutes of showering and cleaning up. And God knows what the shower looks like when you're done. I don't want to know, man. I don't want to know. But like the toilet paper washing your hands in the sink, the freaking lemons. But what I don't know if I've talked about is the first 6 months he dated my mom. He rolled out the red carpet. He was trying to portray himself as something that he wasn't. And that was a guy who was good to his girl. And so the first big thing they did was he took her to Hawaii. Like they went on a big Hawaiian vacation. They left us home for a week. I think I might have mentioned they left us home with the Rondo Man. The Rondo Man was a guy who would go to the grocery store and get Rondo ice cream treats out of the trash. They haven't made Rondos in, I don't know, 30 years. Rondo was little chocolate bonbon ice cream things. And he managed to know when they were going to throw them out, so he could get them out of the trash and take them home and enjoy them. Like, what kind of ninja skills does it take to get ice cream out of the trash, get it in your car, and get it home, and have it still be technically ice cream? So the Rondo Man stayed with us for a week, which was like one of those sitcom movies, like Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. Like, we thought the guy's just gonna die, and we'll spend the week hiding his corpse and parading him around town like he was still alive. The Rondo Man. Rondo Man ended up falling asleep with a lit cigarette and burning himself up to death, including his whole house. Yeah, good times, right? So he took my mother, Berg did, to Hawaii, and she was, oh my God, she was so excited for this trip. She had never done anything like that in her life. She was going to go to Hawaii, and I know that my mom used the trip to make like the best possible Hawaii trip you could imagine. But I also know it was with Berg, and the guy's notoriously cheap about everything. So I think I never got the full story. But I know that they stayed at a really cheap motel, I think, and went to the beach a few times. But he took her grocery shopping in Hawaii, and they had sandwiches at the motel. Like, they didn't go out to dinner, they didn't go to a luau, they didn't go see Don Ho. It was as cheap a trip as you can make and still technically go to Hawaii. But she talked about that for years. My boyfriend took me to Hawaii. He took me to Hawaii. And I remember thinking, oh man, and I wasn't jealous. Like, I have never had any care to go to Hawaii. It's not my scene. I'm not really a beach guy, and I live 20 minutes from the beach here. We go once a year. So I never really was, okay, hey, he took you to Hawaii. That's awesome, Mom. Oh, wait, he's moving in. Oh, that's going to be great. The Hawaii trip was such a fiasco, and he followed it up with, he did something for my mom she had wanted her whole life, other than the Hawaii trip. He bought her a fur coat. He bought my mom a fur coat. And I remember when they brought the coat home, my mom made some big deal about it being, she tried to tell me it was synthetic fur. Like, it wasn't a real fur coat. I didn't really care, but there was a weird perception before I hit high school. Because prior to high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I'd only done a play or two, like really tiny, small productions in elementary school. Remember, there's no middle school here in California. But before I got to high school, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I'd always been told my whole life that I was probably going to be a doctor. That's the Jewish side of my family. I was going to be a doctor. I don't know if I really wanted to be a doctor. My mother said I had thin fingers, so I should probably be a doctor. And I think we compromised by her telling me I was going to be a veterinarian. I was going to be an animal doctor. And somehow, because she had decided I wanted to be an animal doctor, that I must have been an animal rights activist and a member of PETA and all these other odd assumptions to make, and that somehow her bringing a fur coat into the house was going to upset me. I didn't really care. I remember growing up, she had almost a fur coat, one of those big coats you see like people wear when they have the Yale pennant, those big brown coats. She had one of those, but it was really ratty. I think it was from her father, so it would have been from the 30s. But Berg brought her a fake fur coat, and she made a big deal like, now, Jeffrey, it's not a real coat. I'm like, who cares, Mom? But I'll tell you what, to her, that was a real fur coat. And she wore that fur coat every opportunity she could. It didn't matter where we were going. If it was above a McDonald's trip or a grocery store trip, she wore the fur coat. She wore it to church. She wore it to, she didn't go to Eastern Star at that point, but she was still going to church. Eastern Star sort of petered out when Berg came into the picture. And she'd achieved as high as she could go. She was the worthy matron of the Eastern Star, which, if I remember correctly, is the highest you can go in the Eastern Star. But she wore that coat everywhere. So much so that by the end it was kind of ratty. Do you know that Simpsons episode where Marge wants to join that exclusive club? So she buys that fancy Chanel dress, and then the rest of the episode is her taking the Chanel dress and modifying it to be 3 or 4 other different dresses, even though it's the same dress. I think that's what my mom did with the fur coat. Like, how many ways can I wear this coat so people think I have more than one of these, but I really only have one. And I never really got the fur coat thing. I think the fur coat thing was from another generation where they prized that as a status symbol, like a Tiffany tennis bracelet or a fur coat or a Rolex watch. My generation never really cared about that. We had members-only jackets, Swatch watches, and those ID bracelets from school. Remember those silver ID bracelets that had your name and address on it in case you got lost? And some of them had like, I have asthma, or I take insulin twice a day. Little silver bracelets you got from school. God, you know what? I wore that bracelet every day. My Jeffrey Tucker, Studebaker Road bracelet. I bet I still have it here somewhere in a box. With my original home telephone number, 213-863-3620. My original telephone number when I lived in Norwalk. Back when there were only 2 2 area codes in this area, 213 and 714. Then they started feeding all these other ones in, but growing up, it was 213 all through Los Angeles and 714 all through Orange County. But Generation X didn't prize those things the way the previous generation did. With our identification bracelet, our members-only jacket, and our Swatch watch, the whole ensemble's under $150. I remember buying a Swatch watch at Disneyland on Christmas Day, 1988. And it was a Coca-Cola Swatch watch. And I thought, man, this is the last watch I'm ever going to buy. I'm going to wear this watch till it falls off my wrist or I die. That's how important that stuff. And it was so, like, it's so cheap. There's a Swatch watch store in New York casino in Las Vegas. And you go in there and you're like, why does this stuff cost $100? This is a $40 plastic watch. And my Swatch watch was the first one with the Swatch guard. Remember, you had to buy the Swatch guard. You don't want to get it scratched. So you bought the Swatch guard. The Swatch guard looped around the band and then went straight across the whole front face of the watch. The first Swatch guard. It was just enough to deflect, like maybe getting a scratch on it, if you were lucky. They almost immediately went to the circular Swatch guard, which went around the outside of the face and allowed you not only to prevent it from getting scratched, but imagine this, see the time. Because the straight across Swatch guard blocked the time. So you'd have to like sort of tilt it around and like what, I know kind of what time it is, so I'm going to extrapolate by kind of what I see, what time it was. What a bizarre fad that was, the Swatch Guard. But Berg buying her that fur coat, just, I think it cemented in her that this was the guy for her. And maybe his plan worked. Like, I'll take her to Hawaii. We'll do the budget trip to Hawaii. I mean, for him, it wasn't budget. For him, it was like, we're going to take the very expensive trip to Hawaii. And then we'll take the trip. We'll go get the fur coat. And between the Hawaii trip and the fur coat, the guy was in like Flynn. And then he's moved in. And now he's living here. And things were never the same after that. And I've talked in great detail these insane stories about Berg with having to trim the trees and the power lines, spraying down fleas in the backyard, 6 squares of toilet paper, stop warning you, punk, and the lemons. I mean, the lemon story defies any kind of logic about the what you're supposed to do as a teenager and why you should be squeezing lemons. And it's on The Simpsons, Homer, when he opens the bar in his garage, makes Lisa cut lemons for garnish. And I remember watching it like, having that Chief Brody moment on the beach where he goes, so the shift focus, the pull shift focus, where he looks like he's moving, but he's not. You have that moment watching it like, they're doing squeezing lemons on The Simpsons now. That's long before the podcast or me talking about. Maybe somebody else out there, maybe somebody on The Simpsons writing team was told to squeeze lemons as a kid, and they were like, I'm going to put that in an episode. Because I can remember in my later adventures as a senior in high school and then getting out of high school and still talking to people, I was always very clear with people that I wanted to be a writer, that I wanted to write something. And I remember people would always tell me, are you saving this incident for something in a book? And I go, I really don't know. And it's funny how my book series, The Sixth Key, there were a lot of really tiny incidents that happen with people that sort of make their way into the book as a fictional piece of the book that may or may not have happened to somebody in real life. Now, the Back to the Future book obviously is a completely different animal because all of that's true. Only the names have been changed to protect the guilty and the innocent. But The Sixth Key is arguably a work of fiction. But some of the items in there may have happened to people. And I wonder out there if anyone from my past has read my books and come across something that they're like, wait a minute. Wait, this happened to me. And you've put it in the book as happening to them. And that would be, I guess, weird. But it's also pretty complimentary, isn't it? Everybody does that. Everybody has these things that, I can write a whole Berg book at this point. I don't know what you'd call it. Squeeze those lemons. When life gives you lemons, squeeze them. I have no idea. But I've been talking to my brother quite a bit recently. It's weird how you ebb and flow the relationship with your siblings. And my brother's come back, and we have a lot in common, more than we ever had as growing up. As adults, we have way more in common than we did growing up. And it's interesting to reconnect with people. There's never been a disconnection, really. But, I'm using that term loosely. Because everybody goes their own ways. And then you circle back sometimes and meet up, and you have these adventures. He loves the Berg stories. He's always trying to get me to come up with new ones. To dig deep in the psyche to find some of the older ones that maybe I haven't talked about. I was talking on the Silva Gore podcast about an incident I don't think I brought up. They didn't know about it, and they listened to the show quite a bit religiously. And like I said, check out the Silva Gore podcast. They're nearing 200 episodes. That's fantastic. Most podcasts peter out at 20 is a lot of episodes. If you can find 20 things to talk about in your podcast for 20 different episodes, you're doing great. 200? That's freaking amazing. But I was talking to them, and I mentioned something they didn't know what I was talking about. So my Berg did another thing for my mother, and I don't know what this was about. I kind of am understanding it now as I get older. And there's so many things in life that you just don't understand until you get there. And isn't that such a human thing? Because older people are here. They're on the planet. You could sit down and talk to them. You could listen to their stories. And you could take things away and use them in your own life to better yourself. But as Americans, we don't do that. We look at old people as a burden. We look at old people as, oh, they're telling their stupid stories again. But if you'd stop and there's gold in there if you just listen. If you just listen. Because my mother, when I got to be a teenager, my mother got little lap dogs, little Pomeranian dogs. She got one named Lady. It had a whole name, like this long, stupid pedigree name. And the dog was completely pampered. My mother doted on the dog. She'd brush the dog and feed the dog only the right food. And I had no concept of them. Like, why are you taking on the burden of this little animal who is completely dependent on you in ways that a regular, just run-of-the-mill mutt dog wouldn't be? And it's only now, as my kids get older and Josie is going to be 17 at the end of this year, they don't need you much. In fact, all three kids go through that period where you trying to help them is seen as a detriment to them. I can do it on my own, Father. Okay, yes, you can, and you should. But as a parent, you have spent a giant portion of your life caring for someone who one day tells you, I don't need you to care as much. In the physical world, doing things, getting things, they really do, they leave the nest. Even if they're still in the house, they leave the nest, if you know what I mean. I mean, when I turned 16, 17, I was never home. Why would I be? If you listen to the stories, why would I be? So I think my mother taking that dog on was finding something that needed her at a time when her kids didn't need her as much. We have a lizard in our house, a giant iguana named Noni, and Rachel dotes on it. And I think she dotes on it because the lizard allows itself to be doted on, hand-fed, petted and stroked like the James Bond villain with a giant lizard. And there's something to that, because now we don't have, the kids don't need us anymore the way they used to. And what do you do when you feel it slipping away? I'm still a parent. But I'm not a parent that's needed as much anymore. So my mother getting that dog was a way of replacing that part of her life that was no longer being utilized, I guess. Am I psychoanalyzing it too much? Lady was not the nicest dog. She growled. I mean, those little dogs growl and spit and gnash at you. And you're like, why do you have this animal? Get it out of here. And it had little toenails, and it would tick, 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 all across the linoleum. Not a pleasant animal at all. But then, at the end of the day, my mother comes home, she wasn't really working at that point because she'd try to get on disability. But at night, when you're watching their game shows or their crud on TV, the dog is on the lap, and you can, you're stroking the dog, and the dog needs you, and the dog is happy to be with you, and happy to be needed, and wants to be needed. Everything that the kid bristles at that point. So I get it. But I didn't get it then. I only get it now. Doesn't that just say it all? Doesn't that just say it all, that you only get it when you get there? You'll find out. I mean, that's the magic of life, the mantra of life should be, you'll find out. You'll get there. It is amazing. It is amazing to arrive at, to get older and to watch your kids get older. And you know how much I love math. And I always tell the kids, like, when I'm this age, you'll be that age, when I'm this and that. And they just look at you, and eventually they'll get there too. And that's a pride you take. Like, I have raised 3 adults, and eventually they'll get there too, like I did. And you'll realize, like I did, your parents are people, and they're not just, authority figures or cash machines or cooks or doctors. They're people. And it takes a while to get there, but you'll get there. And I hope that anybody watching or listening to this show gets there in time to tell their parents what they mean to them. I didn't get it. I would give anything for 5 more years with my mom. She died at age 54. Man, I always ask myself, like, what would you do if when you were 16 or 17, someone had said to you, your mom has less than a decade left. What are you going to do? Now, see, I'm one of the weird ones. I wouldn't do anything differently, because I try to do everything, and this is no slight on anybody. Everybody lives their own life. You make your choices. You walk your road. You make the choices that you make to get you to where you are, and everybody has their own struggles and how they get there. But I decided in 85 I wanted to be a writer. So by 88, I was writing plays, and I got to go on stage and do a play that my mom watched. And afterwards, she's like, you that came out of your brain. And I'm like, yeah, it was a 3-act play at the high school level, senior year, my play that I wrote. It's not very good, but at the time, I made it happen. I sat and I wrote it, and then I typed it, and then we produced it, and then we performed it. And at the college level, I did 3 plays. What, A Million Nothings, How Sweet the Wind, Dance the Skeleton. So before my mom died, she got to see a play I did at high school level, the first play I ever wrote, called Party Line. Then Business as Usual, which was the 3-act play. And then at the college level, I did 4. I did How Sweet the Wind, A Million Nothings, and Dance the Skeleton, and Stolen Hearts. And she got to see every one of those before she passed. So I didn't ever get to have that conversation with her where you're like, tell me, give me your knowledge. I'm finally ready to listen to you and accept it. That, for guys, that's like 28, 29, and she was gone by the time I was 25. So I didn't get it. Like I said, 5 more years would have made all the difference. She would have met at least one of my kids or 2 of my kids. Time goes, man. You have all the time in the world until you don't. And I've been saying that since some of the early episodes of 91 Reasons. So if there's something you got to know or got to say, you have to do it. But back to the dogs. Lady was the good, purebred dog. They decided Lady needed a friend. Dogs need friends, even though they snipe at each other all day, right? She got this dog named Freckles. Now, Freckles was a beautiful dog. Show quality dog with the long, fur that goes out to a point like almost fox-like, brown, white, beautiful, beautiful animal. The kind of animal that if you went to buy would probably cost you $2,000 back in that time. Like, no joke. They got the dog free. And I was like, wow, who would give up that dog? That's a beautiful animal. And if it's a show dog, it should be trained pretty well. This was Berg we're talking about. And Berg, he's not going to pay top dollar for a dog. It's just not going to happen. So Berg got this dog, Freckles, and brought it home. Now, these dogs are pre-named, so you don't get to name them. They're already older when you get them, and that's fine. Freckles was brought to us because his previous owner had abused him. And you want to talk a special needs dog? This dog needed constant care all day. We felt terrible for the animal. Just a beautiful dog that, when you walked in a room, he would just freak out. Oh! And you have to take the dog and calm the dog. You're in a safe place. No one here is going to hurt you, my little friend. When you fed him and you went, Freckles, the dog would pee itself. If it heard its name, the dog would pee itself. So we got to the point where you can't refer to the dog by name, because the dog in some other life had been singled out by its name and abused. Just a real tragedy with this animal. The other thing that it did was it had never been properly trained how to clean itself up. So because it was so fluffy, like a bunny rabbit, but a dog, it would go out in the backyard, it would do its business, it would come in, and it would have dog feces all over its back end. It just didn't know how to do any of that. And you talk about what kind of dog would Berg bring home? This is the kind of dog Berg would bring. It's not the dog's fault, but Berg was I want the dog that has all the problems, and oh God, he brought home this project. And because, it's Berg, he's not going to fix the dog. The dog then became all of our problem, all of our project to fix. And we did our best with this dog. The dog was never traumatized at our house. The dog was treated with the utmost of kid gloves, and it never worked. The dog was so traumatized that it simply just couldn't function anymore. And you'd look at it it would shake all day, and oh God, I'm about to cry now. Your heart breaks for Freckles. It just breaks. But we had that dog 10 years? A long time to have the dog. And finally the dog died of old age. Thank goodness. And I remember, again, it's Berg. The dog passes away, and we go, Berg, what'd you do with the dog? We have to take care of the dog's remains. I took care of it. What'd you do with the dog, Berg? Oh, it's out back. It's out back? What does out back mean? Berg had buried the dog behind the garage. He had dug a hole, he had put the dog in it, and he had replaced the dirt. You just have that moment of is that what you do? I guess. We're not in the wilderness. We're not in the rural area of the farm where you can bury the dog out back like red fern grows. So we all went back and we saw the mound of dirt where Freckles was. And by the end, Freckles was blind. He was deaf. He was not in a good place. And him passing away was probably the humane thing to do for that animal. And me and Rachel and everybody else in the family who was there at the beach house, it's behind the beaches, he's probably still there. Think about that. The dog's probably still there under the ground behind the garage at the beach house. We stood there and we all said our piece to Freckles. And somebody had the idea to sing Amazing Grace. So we sang Amazing Grace over Freckles' grave. And we got to the line, I was blind, but now I see. Everybody lost it. And we all cried for this poor dog that didn't have the best start, but had a pretty good end. Because even though Berg was not, he doesn't deal with the dog. He fed the dog, and that's it. We washed the dogs, and we took care of the dogs, Lady and Freckles. I don't remember what happened to Lady. I really have no memory. I'll have to ask my brother. But Freckles' end and Freckles' funeral was one of the pivotal moments of living at that beach house. And it was a moment that brought us all together. singing Amazing Grace over a little tiny plot. The dog was very small. But like knowing that he wasn't nervous anymore, he wasn't going to stress out. It was a really touching moment. And when I look back on the beach house days, there's so much craziness and so much negativity and so much wrong that laying Freckles to rest behind the garage counts as one of the only, not soothing's the wrong word, healing moments of the beach house. And Freckles, wherever you are, once you cross the Rainbow Bridge, I think that you were magically transformed and all of your stress melted away, and you looked down at this crazy house that took care of you till the end and said, they really did care about me. Lady was a monster, and Lady was completely raised to be a pampered little doggy. But poor Freckles, say poor Freckles. Like, there's a movie in that. Like, Poor Freckles could be the name of a movie of this poor dog that is rescued by Berg of all people. Berg of all people rescued the little dog and brought him to us, and we cared for the dog. We had cats. I had 2 or 3 snakes. I had a rat. I had mice. I had a chicken at one point. And we had Lady and Freckles that we did our best to take care of. And that, doesn't that just say it all? Is it really a house until you've had to bury a pet in the backyard? In Poltergeist, they bury the canary, I think, or the hamster. And in the beach house, it was standing over the plot of Freckles, his final resting place, and singing Amazing Grace. Telling that story was a lot more cathartic than I thought it was going to be. I hope you enjoyed it as much as listening to it as much as I enjoyed telling it, because I didn't think there was anything left to mine from that era, and certainly not anything as rewarding as taking care of that dog till the end. So, Freckles, we're going to pour one out for you, buddy. I'm Jeff Tucker, and this continues to be 91 Reasons.